Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a 19-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to find his path. I am walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Gayle Swift, an adoptive parent as well, and she's authored 3 books about adoption, one for little kids, one for teens, and one to help Christian adults become more adoption attuned. I'll put all 3 books in the show notes, and I encourage you to check them out. She is a certified family coach specializing in helping families before and after adopting, and she co-founded Growing Intentional Families Together. Her organization also has a podcast called Essentials of Adoption Attuned Parenting. She is a staunch adoptee rights activist, as I am, and she will help all of us know how we can help shift the adoption narrative in our culture. Thanks for being with us on Unraveling Adoption, Gayle. I'm glad you're here.
Well, I think that's a great introduction, Beth. I really appreciate it. I certainly join in wanting to make our family safe for our kids, physically and emotionally. It's a great goal, and it's one I share with you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really important for us adoptive parents to speak out about this stuff and elevate the voices of our adopted kids and elevate their needs and their rights and their health, really, their safety. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we get to all your activism and writing and coaching and everything, I want to hear a little bit about your family's adoption story, whatever part of it you'd like to share.
I'm sure I'll give you a little capsulated version. When I was 15, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so I had a hysterectomy. And then at that point, I knew I would never have biological children. So when my husband and I married, we knew that if we decided to become parents, it would be through adoption. So we never rode that roller coaster of infertility, hope, and despair. And I think that helps us understand and empathize a little bit more with our kids because we had none of that infertility baggage in that regard. It was a settled issue. So it was kind of the foundation in which we walked forward. So nonetheless, we grew up in the culture as everybody else. I was born in the 50s. So our understanding of adoption was based on the cultural presuppositions that it was basically benign, that we would all walk forward pretty much unscathed. Their birth mothers would put it behind them, and we would walk together into the future happily ever after. And of course, the reality turned out to be so much different. We could see that our kids were suffering. We were adopting before open adoption. When we turned to therapists for a little bit of assistance for our struggling kids, we were told we were too strict, we weren't strict enough, we were inconsistent, we were too consistent. It was always parents' fault. And yet we could see our kids were struggling no matter what we did. It didn't seem to alleviate their pain because the average kid would have learned from their choices. They weren't learning, they were amplifying. And it broke our hearts. So eventually we hit the teenage years on high.
Yeah.
And we really suffered as a family. Our kids ended up in care as a way, we hope, to keep them alive and safe and to keep us safe. Not any chapter in our family history. However, we remained in connection and in relationship, and many years down the road, we have healed. And we are connected well. But when our kids were in therapeutic programs, we came into contact with lots of other struggling families, and most of them were adoptive families. And it's sort of like the alarm bells were ringing in our heads. It's like, there's something here. We can't all be failures as parents. What is it about adopted kids that makes their pain so intractable? And this is when I became a certified coach, and while at the coaching academy, connected with other adoptive parents who had had similar experiences, and why we founded Growing Intentional Families Together. We thought we can't rewrite history. That's not possible.
Right.
But take the suffering and knowledge and wisdom that we all garnered and put it to use, help other families. So that's where we are. So we continue to try to help other families.
I'm on that same boat with you. What are we supposed to do now? Return our children? That's ridiculous. And that would be extremely,
And people say that to you, right?
Oh, yes. I've been told, take him back to Japan. I'm like, are you kidding me? That would be so destructive to him right now. That would not get the result anyone would want. But I understand their impulse if an adoptee is extremely angry and upset about the whole situation of adoption, they just want it all to go away, but we're not going to return our kids. And we have to figure out how to help our kids get what they need and how to help ourselves stay sane through the whole process. So I'm right with you. And I have that same heart to help other people that are coming behind me, hopefully younger than when I figured it out. It sounds like we both figured out in teen years, right?
Yeah, well, that's when they start
Oh,
really understand what adoption costs them. And we can
yeah.
help prevent early childhood years in adoptive parents when adoptive families must think everything's great. I hear some adoptive families struggle, but not mine. We're so lucky it's
Yeah.
not our family. And that's because it tends to happen later. But the
Yeah.
driving forces and the historical perspective and the relational interactions that occur while they're toddlers and young kids and elementary schoolers is stuff we can help parents change because we look at the adoption experience through the presuppositions of our culture. We think adoption is benign.
Hmm.
So it's like horses that have the blinders on. We can only stay
Hmm.
forward. We can't see
Hmm.
everything that's on the periphery. The metaphors we use in life affect what we're able to see. So if we see raising a family as a battle to hammer them into shape, teach them how to be a good citizen, how to conform, how to do this, how to do that,
Hmm.
and not as a way of being curious with them, wondering what's their experience like growing up in our family. So
Hmm.
another metaphor, jigsaw puzzles. We've all played jigsaw puzzles and
Hmm.
we've all seen the images throughout the internet where people show the missing piece, right? So we understand that missing piece.
Yes.
So we
Hmm.
look at the whole in our families. That was
Hmm.
our inability to have children or our yearning for children. And
Hmm.
then we look at a child that's available for adoption. We say, perfect, he'll fit
Yeah.
right in.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make any difference what shape they really are. We're going to cram them
Right.
into that
Cram them in.
space, right? And
Yep.
so as a consequence, we don't realize we're cutting off the little knobs on their puzzle piece or squishing them
Yes.
in or whatever.
Yeah.
And while they're in their early years, they can't understand why we can't see what's happening inside of them.
Hmm.
You've probably heard of Betty Jean Lifton's concept of the ghost kingdom.
Hmm.
I didn't learn about that till my kids were teenagers. And no one ever said to me, let's explore this idea of the fact that even if your children's birth parents aren't in their lives physically, they are absolutely going to be in their lives, in their heads.
That's what she means by ghost kingdom.
Yeah.
The fantasies that your child has about their birth
Yeah,
family.
yeah. And that
Yeah.
it's a really strong force. And so, for instance, one of the things parents can do when they're raising little kids, they're out in the garden and you see that your child is really interested in gardening. Or let me rephrase a little bit. They ask you, can we have a garden in the backyard? And you happen to be a person like me with a coal black thumb. It's a death for plants.
Yeah. Me too.
So this actually happened in our family. I took my son to the garden shop. He picked out stuff. He loved having in the garden. He was a very high energy ADD kid. He loved
Uh-huh.
fishing, quiet fishing, sitting there quiet. It was the only time he was ever quiet for
Huh.
extended periods of time. Once he reunited with his birth parents, almost 2 decades later, we realized his birth mother's family had a Christmas tree farm. His
Wow.
birth father's family came from generations of Greek fishermen.
Wow. It's in his genes. Wow.
It's in his genes. So if you notice when your kid has an aptitude or an inclination that's different from one that's typical in your family, instead of ignoring and or discouraging it, you might drop a conversation seed that says, do you ever wonder if your birth parents are good at gardening? You leave it
Yeah.
like that. They may say nothing, but
Yeah.
you've planted the seed that it's okay to think about it. You know, they need to
Yes.
know that. And if we don't understand things like the ghost kingdom, we don't realize how we're ignoring their own little subtle cue that
Mm.
if we work to connect with it, we can tighten that relational
Mhm.
similarity. And wow, isn't that powerful?
I love that. I love that. And I think adoptive parents are really good at denigrating their birth families.
Mhm.
Oh, you must have got that from your birth parents because that's, some negative trait. I think adoptive parents are really expert at putting them down, which is their own blood, which probably makes them feel really terrible. So finding those things that Hey, I wonder if your birth parents were athletes. My son is an excellent athlete starting at age 3 playing basketball and just like
Wow.
crazy good.
Yeah.
So he definitely would not have gone for me at all, but he just thrived. So if I would have said, wow, I wonder if your birth family was really good at sports because this comes really naturally to you, how much that would make them feel so valued and that his blood, his genetics, his DNA is a bonus, a benefit, right?
It's worthy. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you can imagine how challenging it is for a kid who comes from generations of artists, musicians, very creative people, maybe even
Yes.
quiet people, writers and things
Sure.
like that. If,
Readers, yeah.
if you're
Uh-huh.
adopted into a family where everybody is high energy, let's
Yeah.
go hiking this weekend and let's go for a swim afterwards, and all they want to do is stay in their room and read, it's easy for adoptive parents to criticize that and not recognize it
Sure.
as a biologically based temperament issue that needs to be encouraged and appreciated, not denigrated, and not attributed to those
Yes.
evil birth parents.
Right. Bad genes. Right.
Yeah. Because
Exactly.
really, we don't
So
want to be
important.
rivals with our children's birth parents.
There's room enough. There's room for everybody.
Yeah. And as we reconnected with my children's birth parents, we talk about our son, our daughter,
Nice.
rather than saying my son or my daughter to them
Yeah.
and cutting them out of the picture.
Yeah, because they are ours. We share them. They're not
Exactly.
one or the other. They're all of ours. We all had a part in creating and helping to blossom this child into a grown up. And yeah, it's very complex, but adoptive parents, we can work harder at validating and seeing our children for who they really are, not just who we want them to be, what kind of puzzle piece we want them to fit in. On one of my Facebook groups for adoptive parents, I saw this one that was going to have a party because it was their court date and they were going to have a party with the puzzle themes. And everyone had to write a note on a puzzle piece. And I was like, we want to rethink that. I'm sure she didn't, but I just thought, even if the person giving that party doesn't listen, maybe somebody else at Reddit might
Mhm.
hear that that puzzle piece is not a good metaphor. No one wants to have to fit into a specific little shape.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, it's kind of a limited viewpoint of what that day means. That day means, yes, it's the day
Yes.
that they join your family, but it's also the day when they are permanently
Yeah.
legally separated from their birth family. So it's very much a two-edged sword. And probably not when they want to celebrate in a group with everybody going, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Not a party day.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not a party, maybe a ritual at home to acknowledge all of that.
Mhm.
But yeah, not a party. And I know you've written a really wonderful piece about Gotcha Day. Do you want to just mention Gotcha Day real quick while we're on this?
Yeah, well, about today is good. We, my dear, are wanting to celebrate our children's arrival into our families, which for us is our dream come true, right?
Yeah. It was my best day.
Yeah, for them, it's much more
Yeah.
complicated. But
Yeah.
God today means when we celebrate it in that way, it's focused on us. We acquired them. It's totally blind to their losses. It's adoptive parent centric. It's not adoptee centric. And it's really a day that we need to acknowledge both the loss and the gain. In our blogs and in our books and in our podcast, we regularly talk about the both ends of adoption. There are
Mhm.
so many both ends, the happy and the sad, the gain and the loss, the fracturing of the birth family before our families could be created. It's very messy. It's not clean and it's not
Yeah.
a party thing to be celebrated. Of course, we're
Mm.
glad we got them. But, for instance, if you were in a terrible accident and you lost both of your legs, and then you were able to get the world's best prosthetics, those fancy ones that you can see they can run and run.
Oh, yeah. That looked like a bar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are cool.
But anyway, the fanciest thing in the world, they give you super strength in your legs, things that you would
Mhm.
never have had if
Mhm.
you kept your original legs. I'm guessing, I'm certain really, you'd still miss your original legs,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we are all familiar with the concept of phantom pain in missing limb,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yes.
So that metaphor carries over with the phantom pain of their missing families.
That's a
So
good
turning
metaphor.
this into this limited view celebration, it
Mhm.
doesn't do our kids a service. It really doesn't.
I feel so guilty that I did that for my son. I even brought treats to his school for his Gotcha Day.
Oh,
So
wow.
I just blabbed it all over to everybody. And oh, my poor kid. I'm so sorry, Joey. So whenever I have a chance, I just try to tell younger parents, don't do that. Don't do that. If you and your spouse or family wants to do it without your kid, celebrate the good parts or celebrate the pictures of that day or whatever. But yeah, it doesn't need to be a big production.
We celebrated what we called homecoming day, the day they came to our
Oh, uh-huh.
home. And of course,
Hmm.
you gave them an extra present that day. So they had their birthday and their homecoming day. So
uh,
as little kids, they called
sure.
it their bonus birthday. But it was
Yeah.
still a little bit blind, right? So what parents can do is make it an opportunity to talk about the both and,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah.
on a
Hmm.
homecoming day or an arrival day or a
Yeah.
family day and say, I know we were really, really happy that you joined our family, but I wonder if you really miss your parents. Does it make you sad? So as they get the message, it's okay
It's
for them
okay.
to have their feelings, whatever they are.
Yeah.
One caveat we need is make sure our body language is as welcoming of a
Uh,
complex conversation. Because if our body language is, we're almost on the verge of tears when we ask them, it
yeah.
puts pressure on them to suppress those ambivalent feelings. And they have
Yeah.
nowhere to go other than internalizing it. And it's such a great opportunity for connection and support if we're open to these difficult conversations. To the same way it's difficult for us to think of the fact we couldn't grow our children in our bodies. At least I think for
Right.
most people, you look at a pregnant woman, you think, oh gosh, I wish I could have taken care of them from the moment they were conceived.
Hmm.
I would have eaten
Hmm.
the best diet. I
Hmm.
would have done
Hmm.
everything right, which of course is naive, but it's
Yes,
understandable.
sure. Yeah.
We have those same kind of ambivalent feelings too.
Yeah. Oh, I have terrible trouble when people are pregnant or baby showers. Oh, hell no. I
Hmm.
can't go to baby showers. I don't like holding babies. I got Joey when he was 7 months, so I don't really understand babies younger than that at all. And it just makes me so sad. It took me a while to realize, but yeah, I would just avoid that. So if that's happening to me as a grown ass adult, do you think our kids are going through stuff anytime they think about their birth family? Well, of course they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And I think in your books, you do such a great job of that both and. And there's so many children's books, particularly picture books that are like, oh, your tummy mummy and everyone loves you and it's all great and happy, happy, joy, joy. But your books, I'm thinking particularly about your ABC book,
Hmm.
ABC Adoption and Me, right?
Yes.
Which you made with your daughter,
Yes. Yes.
which is so
Yep.
cool. And it talks about the good and the bad, all the grays, which I think you might as well start talking about the gray when they're really little because no one lives in a black and white kind of world. It's really
Exactly.
smart.
If you encourage them to talk to you about the complex things when they're little, when they're teenagers and they're hitting adolescent and identity formation, you'll have laid that important groundwork because those years
Yes.
are stormy.
Yeah.
It's just an
For for
emotional.
any kid,
Yeah.
you add the adoption to it. Ooh,
Yeah.
all the identity issues.
Hmm.
And for my son, I don't know about your kids, but my son was transracial as well. And we got him from Japan. Well, his dad is Japanese American, but I'm not. I'm white. And his school was extremely white and extremely racist. So he had a huge layer of transracial on
Hmm.
top of it, just so much. And we didn't do a good job of keeping that door open. I didn't hide it or anything, but I didn't make it okay to talk about. Like, for instance, since I'm saying all the stuff I'm ashamed about today, he was maybe 8 and in the car one day, he says, Mom, I'm just really sad because I just feel like my birth mom threw me away.
Uh,
And instead of saying, oh, that must feel terrible. What do you need?
mhm,
I said, oh, no, honey, it's okay. Your mom didn't throw you away. She loves you. And so do I. And it's all good. And don't worry. It's blah. And God, I feel bad about that. Because what that did, even though I had the best intentions, I
mhm.
didn't want my son to feel sad. But what that did was he realized, oh, I can't talk to my mom about this. That shut the door.
Yeah.
And then he didn't open that door till he was in the psych hospital after trying to unalive himself.
I think that is so common, Beth. We don't want our kids to
Mhm.
suffer.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to sit with them in their pain. And
It's really
really,
hard.
that's one of those moments of silence that they really
Yeah.
need.
Just sit there with them.
Shut down our conversation and just
Yep.
listen. Wow, that must
Just
really be
listen.
sad. And even, that classic about, you're not my real mother. I mean, we
Oh,
have
yeah.
all
That
heard
comes
that.
up.
And oh gosh,
Yep. Ooh, that hurts.
they know it's going to hurt and it
Yep.
does hurt. However,
Mhm.
if we can step outside the lens of our pain and step into the lens of what does my child need from me at this moment, what he needs
Yes.
from me at that moment is, wow, you must be so angry to be feeling that. And
Mhm.
I wonder if you're missing your birth parent and thinking they would have done things differently. That opens a
Yes.
conversation instead of saying, you ungrateful, whatever,
Yeah, you're grounded. Ah.
or breaking down into emotional collapse, which also teaches
Oh,
them.
yeah.
It teaches them two things. Wow, I could do that again. And
Oh,
two,
yeah. That was effective.
there's no common ground in this area that we can share.
Mhm.
And what they really need is our common ground, our empathy,
Yeah.
our support, that kind of foam room that they can kind of thrash around
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be in that both and space and supporting and empathizing and also be feeling like, I failed my kids. They don't love me. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not easy.
Oh, it does feel terrible. Very not easy. It takes a lot of groundedness and mindfulness and staying present. And it takes a lot of work, which I did not do. I did not know there was a lot of work to be done. When I adopted, I just thought it was just parenting. I did not think there was an extra layer on top of it.
That's your cultural mythology.
Yeah. It's like just blank slate, just come on over here. It'll be just fine.
Yeah.
I was also going to say about when they say, you're not my real mom or whatever. And if we fall apart, some of them, like my people pleasing child, will feel like they now have to take care of us
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
addition to their own complex feelings. Oh no, now I have caused my mom to go crazy and now things feel really unstable. Oh God, now what? That's not okay to put on our kids either. We got to deal with it outside, with your own therapist or whatever.
Well, and sometimes the adoptive father will jump in and say, oh, talk to your mother like that. And there's like, it's two against one kind of thing. Both adoptive parents are missing the emotional mark. At that moment, it really isn't about the parents. It's really about they made that need for support and understanding. And in the moment, we don't know that adoptive competency is sorely lacking in this country.
Yes.
Many adoptive parents are not adequately educated about what they need to know to be a competent adoptive parent. It is, in fact, very different from parenting a child to whom you gave birth. Very.
It is. And I think that's why it stings so bad when they say stuff like, you're not my real mom, because you're like, oh, dang, he's in pain. And the pain is caused by me adopting you. And I feel terrible that this whole thing is because, it goes back to me not being able to get pregnant. And I wanted to create this family. And this is not what I had in mind when I had that idea. It's just like the whole thing goes south. And no one told me at all. And what can we do to help people get that education they need? Oh, I saw a post in some sort of foster adoptive families kind of Facebook group. And this woman, she said, I'm 38 years old and I want to adopt as a single woman, but I don't want to have a special needs child because I grew up with a special needs sibling or something like that. So I don't want a special needs child. Where would be the best place to go get a child? I'm like, that sounds so horrible. It's like, where can I go buy a child that is going to be perfect? And other people did tell her, so I didn't have to, but I wanted to tell her, you can't get an adopted child that doesn't have special needs. I'm sorry. Every single one of our adopted kids has a special need. It's called adoption trauma. Not that they're disabled, but adoption creates a very big extra layer of parenting skills that are necessary.
Totally right. Totally right. Yeah.
Oh, I was just so offended by her post. I'm like, oh my God, there are people that think like that.
Well, I think that's too that our culture encourages the idea that if you want a child and can see it, you are absolutely entitled to get a child.
Yes.
And our culture supports, oh, poor you, you're infertile. Oh, how sad. And look how lucky this child needs a family.
Yeah, they make it seem like a win-win.
Well, yeah, and that we're rescuing this child
Yes.
from a dysfunctional or misfunctioning birth family. So it's very messy. So that's why I think education is really an important vanguard. And that's why podcasts like yours and your aptitude group are so important, because until people know better, they will follow the cultural mythology.
Yeah.
And use the metaphor of brewing a cup of tea. You put the tea bag in, you take the tea bag out, but it's now tea. So we're living in a world that has these presuppositions about adoption. And it's with your podcast and other informed groups that are working to rewrite the mythology. We're diluting the effect of the cultural tea. It takes a lot of dilution before you make an impact. So that's why it's important. We don't want to vilify people for what they don't know, but we do want them to learn. And once they hear about things like adoption competency and adoption attunement, it's incumbent on them, if you are going to be a competent parent, you need to get educated.
Yeah. And
one of my favorite books is Telling the Truth to Your Adopted Child, Making Sense of the Past. It's by Betsy Kiefer and Jane Schooler. They are well-known names in the adoption world. But I think telling the truth to your adopted child, I'm going to roll the timeline back a little and say, tell the truth to ourselves. The truth
Ooh.
is adoption is messy, it's complicated, and it's not without pain and consequences. That's
Yeah.
where we need to start, whether it's
Mhm.
with the church, with our schools, with our communities, when friends say things like, oh, he's so lucky, but look how ungrateful he is. They were acting
Mhm.
out and being so naughty. How do you stand it? It's like they have no appreciation
Yeah.
what adoption means for our kids. Not
Yeah, I think definitely the adoptive parents need to be educated. And I know you and I are both trying to change the whole cultural narrative, which is no small feat.
exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, if we can get the teachers and the other parents that are not related to adoption, but parents of our kids as classmates to understand adoption a little bit better. So if you're listening to this episode today, please share it with people that are not in the adoption world. Share it to people that have nothing to do with adoption. I think people are like, oh, I don't have anyone adopted in my family. I don't need to listen to this stuff. But somehow, I don't know how, we got to get this message to everyone so people are not so black and white about it. And so they can help our kids out in the world too.
Absolutely. Because they share the world space with our children,
Yeah.
and their ignorance is hurting our kids. So
Yeah,
it's
for
incumbent on
sure.
us. And even within our own families, there's lots of us that have
Mhm.
family members that are judgmental, aloof,
Mhm.
unhappy, that we have adopted and polluted the family
Oh, yeah.
tree
Oh,
kind
God.
of thing,
Yeah,
right?
people don't give presents to the adopted kid, but
hmm
they give them to the bio. Oh,
hmm
people are so horrible
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, Beth, as the adopted parent who is deeply connected to their own nuclear family, it's hard for us to step up and say to grandpa or Aunt Nellie, what you're doing is not fair to our kids. In some families, when adoptive grandparents make their will, they will specifically leave out
Mm,
adopted kids.
mm,
It happens all the time. We cannot tolerate having our family members treating our kids less than equal. If we have to make a choice between they're treating our kids the way they deserve to and staying with our nuclear family, we chose to adopt these kids. To
mhm.
me, the choice is very clear cut. We have to choose our
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
over unkind, unaccepting families
Yeah.
and work to wake them up and educate them. Because they're
Yeah.
just like ourselves. We didn't learn all this stuff at day one, right?
Oh,
It took decades before we knew it.
yeah.
So
And hopefully they'll come along, but
give families grace as they learn,
mhm,
but make sure they're listening.
protect our kids.
Yeah. And speak up for them.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because not everybody has read as much or, studied as much as hopefully adoptive parents would. And
hmm
so it's our duty to advocate for our kids, even in our own family, even if it pisses people off.
Yeah.
You guys should
Yeah. And it's not
protect our
easy.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, not easy. You mentioned the church a few minutes back, and I know you wrote a wonderful book called Reimagining Adoption: What Adoptees Seek from Families and Faith. And it was geared toward the Christian audience. I want to talk a little bit about the church's impact and influence on adoption. What made you want to write that book in the first place?
The church has been such a strong advocate and proponent of adoption for decades.
Mm.
And they have not updated their understanding of adoption. It's still based to a great extent, I mean, not every church, but to a great extent, on the false belief that adoption is totally benign and that children are better off being adopted. And then in a small set of churches, adoption is seen as a way of examining the loyal faithful. So in that regard,
Aha.
they're seeing our kids as souls to be saved.
Yeah, like a mission field.
Yeah, yeah. And nobody wants to feel like someone's project.
No, that does not feel good.
Imagine growing up in a family where you're the family project. You're the one that got rescued. They can adopt, but they need to do it with being very well educated on adoption complexity.
Yeah.
They need to understand the 7 core issues of adoption. They need to understand the ghost kingdom, all these kind of things we've touched on. The church, even now, still resists the effort to open birth records. They are
Oh,
actively
really?
resisting opening birth records. And some churches teach that when an adopted child seeks to reconnect their birth family, that it is ungrateful. And in some cases, they're told it's sinful. And again, that's
Oh,
that's
wow.
all based on not understanding adoption complexity. So
Mm.
that's why the need for education is so important. So one of my colleagues and co-founders at Growing Intentional Families is also a pastor. And
Oh, okay.
her brother is a pastor, and her husband is a
Mhm.
pastor, and her father is a
Okay.
pastor. Sally had that expertise and that passion because she has 3 adopted children, and she could see how the church was missing the mark, that the good intentions of the church was not really serving adopted people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we did not want to vilify the church because even us, we did bad things towards our kids out of ignorance.
Sure.
We can't change the past, but we darn well can change the future and the present.
We can work and be better for the
So
future.
that's why we wrote the book. And the purpose is to wake up people.
I really love the book because you're gentle, but direct. And you say, okay, here are the places that the church has been misguided or has hurt our adopted kids. And here's what you can do to change it. And you even have discussion prompts or questions at the end of each chapter. I can imagine a small group could study it together, or a minister's group or something like that could work on it together. And it's very thought provoking, and it just challenges some of the basic assumptions of church. Like, one of the things that I really learned in your book was the orphans and widows piece. Can you go into that a little? That was fascinating.
Sally would know the chapter and verse, but I don't. But it's called The Great Command to go out and adopt. The idea to adopt orphans and widows, right? That's really what the Great Command is. But in fact, what we do as a culture is we adopt the child and abandon the widow or the birth mother in more neutral parlance, because oftentimes, I mean, they have biological parent. They might just not have a father or an ability to care for the child. So it's important. We could encourage supporting the widow and the orphan as a dyad rather than separating them.
I always thought of a widow as like an old lady, but I suppose back in the day, there were many widows that were young women that their husband died at war or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. And so the widow and orphan are together usually, right?
Yes.
That was like a one thing, not two separate things.
Well, in those days, orphan did not necessarily mean parentless. It meant no father.
Just the dad.
Which is awesome. Again, languaging matters.
Yes.
It always matters.
So wouldn't it be amazing if the church really, really took care of widows and orphans together instead of just taking the orphans away to a whole nother country? As a dyad. A friend of mine the other day was going to go with her church to support teen parents. I'm like, what an amazing thing to do as a church, to support teen parents. That is amazing, considering my mother was a teen parent and she got kicked out of school and kicked out of her house and kicked out of everything and said, okay, you made your bed, now you lie in it. The church was definitely not kind to her then, but I thought that was really amazing. So, wow, churches can do stuff like that.
Yeah, if the church put its power behind preserving families instead of separating them, wow. Think of all the damage that could be avoided.
Exactly. Then you don't have the adoption trauma on the child, which you and I are trying to help manage with our children, help to find them healing or whatever. And then also the birth mother, who our culture does not really even consider their trauma, but they are extremely traumatized as well most of the time, I would guess, for relinquishing and then saying, well, don't think about it anymore. Just go on with your life. Well, how do you just not think about that? Come on, that's crazy.
The birth mother, too, she's vilified and she's glorified both.
Both,
Do the right thing. You're so brave. You love him so much. Give up your child.
Yes.
She makes that choice and it's like, oh my goodness, how could you do that? Right? So once the decision is made, she's judged negatively. And of course, that message that if you love your child, you give them away is, again, one of those predominant pieces of cultural mythology that is poisonous. Because if you teach your children that if someone really, really loves you, they will give you away.
That does a number on their other relationships.
They'll always be looking for that other shoe to drop. So as they get into an intimate relationship, they're going to say, okay, when will they love me enough to leave me? Because it's coming. I mean, that's the presupposition in the back of their mind.
It's very difficult to undo. And my son is trying to navigate that now. And, you know, as an adolescent, it's hard to navigate relationships, period.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Add in substances and major attachment disorders. I mean, that makes so many landmines. A poor thing. It's going to be so difficult for him to have just a regular, healthy relationship, to undo all those layers of when someone really loves me, they leave me.
I think it's possible, but I don't think it's easy.
It'll take a lot of work.
I think there's a lot of scar tissue. You mentioned attachment disorders. I'm not a therapist, but this is another one of my high horses. We hear the words reactive attachment disorder. And in my opinion, given the circumstances that our kids experience in terms of fractured relationship, gaslit responses to their pain and trauma, the cultural mythology, to me, their need to be so protective and hold themselves aloof from other relationships makes sense.
Yeah, it's not really a disorder, is it?
You know, it's a response. So, I mean, I'd like to think of it as reactive attachment response.
Oh, I like that.
Given those circumstances, to me, it's a very logical response.
Yeah, your young brain, who doesn't know much yet when they're an infant,
Mhm.
you got to kind of admire them. You know, that they're trying to solve a problem. They're like, okay, I'm not safe here. So I'm just going to dissociate in my mind and just kind of steer clear of all of it because I'm not feeling safe. So that's pretty amazing that our brains can do that.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't help us in the long run, but it's what your baby mind did or whenever your trauma happened to you, right?
Yeah, it saves you from a lot of pain, also saves you from the joy. That's the sad part.
Yeah.
You know, you lock out the pain, but you lock out the joy too.
Yeah. Because you can't choose only certain parts of it to dissociate from.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much.
It's a sad coping technique.
Hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the church? Any other messages that you try to educate churches about?
I think educating their community and staff about adoption complexity and the 7 core issues, to me, the most critical piece of education the church should want to do is understanding absolutely adopting is not totally benign. Then if
Yeah.
they keep that in mind when they're counseling pregnant women, they won't be so quick to suggest adoption. They won't be so
Oh,
quick
right.
to evaluate adoption as the best option. You
Mhm.
know, yes, if a woman is unemployed, has no home, has no job, no resources, it's very hard for her to take a baby home.
Mhm.
So that's the only thing you put in the pros and cons column.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you also put in the cons column all the emotional trauma, all the
Mhm.
generational trauma,
Mhm.
et cetera, it starts to look a little bit less black and white. And then if we make
Mhm.
room for inserted resources, because very often women that are experiencing crisis pregnancy, if crisis is only going to last a year or 2 or 3, and
Right.
then she'll be on her feet. But if you encourage her to place her child for adoption, 2 or 3 years later, she's on her feet, employed, has a job, but no baby for
Child's
forever.
gone.
And, you know,
Yes.
that fracture is forever for both of them.
Yeah. And the church is an amazing community that could come around that birth mom and provide childcare or a
Mhm.
job or mental health care. Or, you know, if people want to, people spend many, many thousands of dollars to adopt. And the culture spends billions of dollars on foster care and all of this whole industry. The adoption industry is like a multi-billion dollar industry, as I
It
understand.
is.
Well, what if we took some of that money and instead of giving it to the adoption agencies or to foster families, why don't we give that to the birth families and prop them up for the year or 2 or 3? What an investment
Mhm.
in that family to keep that family together. What can the churches do? I think the churches are equipped to do just that, don't
Oh
you
my
think?
gosh, absolutely. They could be so powerful because their intentions are
Yes.
positive. They want to help.
Yes.
They really do.
Yes.
They want to help it. They don't need to cause emotional chaos,
Mm-mm.
but they're still hanging on to old presuppositions, misinformation,
Mhm.
disinformation. Current research has revealed so much of the negative fallout of adoption, and that's not getting to people but making
Right.
policy decisions. And it's certainly
Right.
not getting to your average community, you know,
Mm-mm. I bet seminaries don't talk about adoption at all.
not much, I don't know. But one of the quotes in our book, because our book is peppered with quotes from adoptees, as you remember. And one of them was my friend Lynn. She was at a service where the pastor was standing up at his pulpit and said, "Everybody that was adopted, raise your hand."
Ah,
You know, she did not want to raise her hand. That's her private business, right? She did not want to be an
of
object
course.
lesson for that Sunday service. Nobody raised her hand. Now, she knows she's not the only adoptee in the room, and nobody raises their hand. And the pastor persists and finally calls her out by name.
Oh,
Um,
no.
Now,
That's
he
terrible.
did not mean to be unkind or emotionally colorblind. He's buying into that image of adoption. It is wonderful. Tells your
Yeah.
blessing story about how awesome it was to be adopted, right?
Right. Something to be proud
So
of.
we've got to re-educate the church community, the pastors, the elders, and the citizens. Because in that church community, I guarantee you, there are thousands of birth mothers that have never let on that they were birth mothers.
Yes. And we all need to be thinking about that. I think when churches have their big Mother's Day celebration every year,
Oh,
maybe that's something we could think about of how fraught Mother's Day is. I mean, statistically, I think every church probably has at least one or two or three birth parents in it, don't you think?
Oh, at least
But they
probably
probably don't
hundreds.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're not about to come out of the closet with that if it doesn't feel safe. So, gosh, just to acknowledge these complexities of everyone's lives and how much of it is sexual shame and, oh, Lordy, just the many layers that the church can either add or take away pain from adoptees and birth parents alike, and adopted parents too.
One of the quotes we have in our book is from Corinthians 13:6. I wrote it down. That's why I know the number, because otherwise I wouldn't. That's Sally's purview. Love rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love rejoices whenever
Oh,
the truth wins out.
yes.
Lord, really, that's what the church wants. The church wants the truth to come out. We just need
Mhm.
to wake them up to what the truth is.
Yeah. So, gosh, I hope this episode and your book gets into the hands of many ministers and youth leaders and congregants and Christian leaders, Sunday school teachers. And it's so necessary. And I don't know of another book that addresses this specific area.
Well, a lot of the books are very, very pro-adoption in the
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Christian world. So it's unique in
Oh,
that. I'd like to read one paragraph
sure.
that I wrote down. It's holding a presupposition that adoption is totally benign, a proverbial win-win-win solution that leaves all better off and with only minor scars, justifies the belief that adoption can provide a child with the best environment, a traditional family. We easily can slide into presupposing that an adoptive family is the best outcome for a child. We may then minimize the loss of the child's first family and dismiss the serious consequences and agony of early maternal child separation that occurs in adoption. This misplaced focus on the benefits of an adoptive family may tempt us not to work hard enough to avoid these losses. We may avoid asking questions that could reveal, when all factors are considered, that an adoptive home may not be the optimal environment for a child. We may believe that adoption is right for our child. Unfortunately, our adherence to the rightness stance can bias our thoughts, and bias can lead us to justify unsavory actions like the buying of babies.
Yes. Oh, so true and so important for people to start to get the hang of this stuff. It's not that hard. I mean, it's tough, but it's not that hard to understand. It's hard to take it
I
in.
think bottom line is the church, and I think even our culture wants what's best for children, but
Mhm.
they're stuck in an old mindset.
Mhm.
They're stuck in the old
Yep.
mindset. We're working hard to change that.
Yes, yes. We are on the march trying to get
Mhm.
everybody on board to help our kids. That's what we need to do, is to prioritize the adoptees in all of this. What's the best thing for the adoptees? Because they had zero choice in this whole matter.
Yeah.
Adopted parents had the most choice.
Yeah. And the most
Birth
power.
parents had a little bit of choice sometimes. A lot of times they were coerced, but the adoptees, they were just pawns in this whole system that is way, way bigger than they are. And we as adoptive parents, we need to do whatever we can to protect our kids and to give them the best life that they can have.
I don't think any of us can have too many people that love us. So if our churches love
Absolutely.
us, birth families love us, our adoptive
Mhm.
families love us, we'd all be better off.
There's room for it all.
Yeah.
There's plenty of room.
We'd be better off and we'd be safer, Beth.
Yes, all of us.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing really great things out there in the world. And by the way, Gayle mentioned Aptitude. Aptitude is my support group for adoptive parents facing adoptions challenges. So this group is not the butterflies and rainbows kind, if you haven't guessed, of let's celebrate adoption. There's plenty of those out there. This group is for those of us that are kind of coming out of the fog, or we're out of the fog and we're realizing, oh boy, our kids are off the rails, or we are trying to prevent our kids from falling off the rails, or we're trying to get ahead of this thing. So I would love it if more young adoptive parents came on board.
Mhm.
And it's a free group. Anyone that's an adoptive parent that is willing to face this stuff, you're welcome to join. I'll put the link in the notes. But just a few days ago, before we recorded this, Gayle was our guest for our monthly Aptitude Speaker Forum. So each month we bring in a speaker, an expert in some area. mostly adoptees, but sometimes adoptive parents like Gayle, that's an expert in something. And we've had birth parents, and we might have an adoption professional that is not themselves in the adoption constellation, but that has something special to offer that is pertinent to adoptive parents. So that's aptitude. And I would encourage you to share this episode, like we said before, share it with people in your community, in your churches that are not in the adoption constellation at all. Help us get the word out that adoption is both and. It's not black and white. It is all of it. It's all the grays, and just kind of try to keep changing the narrative so we can help our kids better. And I wanted to let you know that we also have a Patreon account. Our Patreon account helps sustain this podcast because, as you noticed, there's no commercials. And so Patreon is the way we can bring in a little bit of money. It helps me pay for this Riverside app that I'm using to record on. It helps me pay for the MailChimp that I send out my newsletters on. Helps me pay for my podcast distribution site, Libsyn, which distributes it to all of the places. There's all these little things that I have to pay for. And for as little as $5 a month, you can just help offset those expenses. So if you would like to do that, go to patreon.com/unravelingadoption. And Gayle, if people wanted to get a hold of you personally, would you like to share your email or website with them?
Sure. Our website is gift, GIFT, familyservices.com. My email is Gayle, GAYLE, at giftfamilyservices.com.
Okay. And you are a coach too. So if
Yes,
anyone wants
yes.
individual coaching, or do you do family coaching or just individuals?
We do both.
Family or individual coaching.
Yeah.
And you have groups too.
We can, yes.
Okay. You can do groups.
And we speak to agencies and things like that.
Yeah. Or if people wanted to bring you to your church,
Mm-hmm.
you could do too.
Yep.
Yeah. Church or your adoption agency or your community group or teachers group or whatever. Gayle is available. Hire her. Definitely.
Well, I want to thank you for the work you do, Beth. It's awesome. And it is so needed. So needed.
Thank you. Well, we are partners in this work, and I am so glad I got to know you. And I recommend your books all the time to all the aptitude parents. And
Thank you.
we'll, I'm sure, continue to collaborate in different ways. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely my pleasure.
And Gayle and I want you all to stay safe.